Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight for diving into data in Schoolnet. This is Pam Batchelor from Digital Teaching and Learning at the Department of Public Instruction in North Carolina. And joining me tonight, I do have two of my colleagues, Cami Nairn and Julie Garganis, and they will introduce themselves in just a minute. We are excited to talk to you tonight about data in Schoolnet. We're going to spend just a couple of minutes as people join the webinar, helping troubleshoot a few issues. First of all, you're going to definitely want a copy of tonight's slide deck. You can find that in three ways. First, in the GoToWebinar panel under the Handouts section, there is a PDF copy of the slide deck that you can click on and download. Or if you click on the chat box, you should have a welcome message and you'll see a link to a bit.ly. If you click on that link, that will open up the slide deck. Or finally, third, you can type the bit.ly that is on the screen right there. You cannot click on the screen. This is just what's being presented from my screen. However, you can type that bit.ly address into your URL bar in your internet browser. So we'll give everyone just a second to choose one of those three methods to getting tonight's PowerPoint pulled up, because it has a lot of links and things that you will want to reference. So while folks are doing that, we'll go ahead and have Julie and Cami introduce themselves. Julie, would you like to start?
Sure. I'm Julie Garganis. I'm the Northeast Regional Consultant. Here with you.
Julie, I believe your audio is going in and out. So why don't we let Cami introduce herself, and then we'll come back to you, Julie, and see if your audio is better.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. I am Cami Nairn. I do work with Pam and Julie on the Digital Teaching and Learning team under Home Base, and I manage the Teacher Evaluation NISA system and Learning.com. Good to be with you guys tonight.
Thank you, Cami. And Julie, let's see if maybe your audio will be a little better this time.
Can you hear me?
I can.
Okay, awesome. All right, this is Julie Garganis. I am the Northeast Regional Consultant with Digital Teaching and Learning, and I also support the DLI grants for the state. And I'm excited to be here with you tonight.
Wonderful. We're so glad to have Cami and Julie with us to help with the questions. And speaking of questions, in the GoToWebinar, you do have a questions panel. If you have questions as I go over things in Schoolnet, please use that questions panel to type them in. GoToWebinar does keep track of who has asked questions, so we will make sure to pause and ask for questions periodically throughout the webinar, and GoToWebinar will help us keep track of that. There's also that handout section that I mentioned earlier that has the PDF copy of tonight's slide deck that you will definitely want to have handy. And there's also an audio issues troubleshooting guide here on slide 2. So if you're having any audio issues with getting started with the webinar, we do encourage you to click on that link for the audio troubleshooting guide, as well as there's a short 1-minute video about GoToWebinar and how to select your sound method and input. And Cami and Julie will be helping in the chat as well. If you haven't had any audio issues, you can type in the questions and we'll help you as best we can. So for tonight, our agenda, we're going to be looking at data in all different types and places in Schoolnet. We're going to look at student profile data. We're going to look at the power of the homepage for assessment data, the pre-formatted reports that Schoolnet automatically creates. we're going to look at our reporting dashboard where you can find data from previous years, as well as create comparison reports. We're going to be looking at subgroup data and then also going through some data scenarios to see what you would do now that you have some knowledge of the different types of data in Schoolnet. And finally, as an exit ticket takeaway, we want to know what you're going to do going forward with data from Schoolnet and how you will use this information. So we do have just one more slide of logistics to go over some CEU questions. So for participating in tonight's webinar, you will get 0.1 CEU, which is equal to 1 hour of credit. You will receive a certificate via email using the email address that you registered for tonight's webinar within 5 business days after the webinar. I do have to go through GoToWebinar and certify attendance. It's not an automatic process, so please be patient and give me those few days. I also have several webinars tomorrow that I will be presenting, so it'll take me a few days after then to get caught up. You will need to take the CEU certificate that I emailed to you and submit it via your local process. Every public school unit has their own process for applying for and approval of credit to be applied to your transcript. So that is not something, unfortunately, I can help you with. You have to go through that local process, and you should have somebody at your school who is a professional development coordinator that can help you with any questions that you may have. All right, so I do have a couple of questions that we're going to ask just to make sure we don't have any audio or video issues and before we get started. So first, we're going to ask if everyone can see my screen. So I do see we have about 47 people in the webinar right now, and we had about 150 registered. So I'm thinking a few more might come in, or being the evening time, some things might have come up. So this is the number I like to see, 100%. 100% can see, and let's hope 100% can hear me. So that's the next question. So far, 100% can hear. Hopefully you can hear. We do have a couple people that say no. So for those of you who are saying no, please make sure you're going through this audio checklist and letting us know if you need help. All right, and then we're going to ask, what is your role? So just to help us understand who is with us joining virtually tonight. And we do know that from time to time we've had today that GoToWebinar. Sometimes if you're joining on a phone or on a particular mobile device, it's gives it trouble with the polls. So if you can't click on the polls, don't worry about it. It's not going to affect your attendance. GoToWebinar is still recording your attendance. It's just one of the quirks of the system, and sometimes with security issues that are set up at different people's networks. All right, so we do.
So Pamela, is the poll on the screen or is it in the webinar panel?
So the poll is actually like a little pop-up box that comes up. So it could be if you have multiple tabs open, it could be that maybe it was kind of hidden under a tab, or some people say they see it, they just can't click on anything. I'm not exactly sure. That's just been something random that's happened today, but it doesn't affect your attendance being recorded, which is usually the concern.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. So we do have mostly classroom teachers with us tonight, and we have a few instructional coaches and facilitators. Thank you for letting us know. I do have one more question before we dive in. I know it's a lot of questions, but just really, what is your experience level with Schoolnet? And you might have to take a second to read these different levels. I was trying to be descriptive. So we'll give everyone about 30 more seconds to respond to this one. All right, 5 more seconds. Okay, we're going to close that poll. So we do have over half that have said that they're a beginner. Wonderful. Thank you for joining us tonight. A few folks that are comfortable, some regular users, and a couple of experts. So that's wonderful. Thank you for letting us know your experience level with Schoolnet. So I am going to go through a few slides here, and then I'm going to log into the training site and actually show you where to find these things. We are using the training site tonight, and all of the screenshots are from the training site because it's we're dealing with data. We're using fictitious data, so that way we can train and also manipulate it in the training site without worrying about any actual live student data. All right. So just a note from Allison, if she's discovered that if you have your screen on full view, you can't click on the poll. You have to minimize it, your screen, I guess. Okay, that's interesting. Thank you, Allison, for sharing. I'll put that in. This is the first time I've used a lot of polls, and we'll actually have some polls at the end of the webinar. So that's a good thing to note for later on. All right, so the first thing we're going to talk about is a student profile. So I love a student profile because A, every student has one. B, every teacher and educator and coach in a building can use the student profile because student profiles really help us dig into the data of our students, and especially I find this screen very helpful for enhancement teachers because a lot of times they don't have the same information that a classroom teacher would have that sees the student every day all the time. So all of this information on the student profile gets pulled in nightly from PowerSchool. There's a sync between PowerSchool and Schoolnet. So student information is updated every night. So if you have a new student that joins your class, the very next day you can go into Schoolnet and look at their information that's been pulled in. A lot of times that's a lot faster than a CUME folder, as I remember from my days. You could take weeks sometimes to get those in, whereas in Schoolnet, as long as the student is coming from another school within North Carolina, since we have a statewide system, all of this information will be in there the next day. So we, of course, have basic information, student overview, and then the next tab is standardized tests. So the standardized test information that you'll see in Schoolnet are things like EOCs, EOGs, ACT tests. Those things are in Schoolnet for across the state. We also still have the M-class data that's in standardized tests, so you'll see that. We are working with iStation to get the test data from the last year and put that into Schoolnet, so that's something that's in progress. You will not see your local tests that you may do, such as we've had questions today about MAP benchmarks. If your district purchases MAP benchmarks, you will not see them in that standardized test panel. That is something that your Schoolnet administrator can add to Schoolnet using an answer key only test, and then it would show up under benchmark tests. So we do have some districts, whether they purchase MAP or Mastery Connect, they upload those scores using that answer key only process, and then those test results live under benchmark tests. Disciplinary information does come into Schoolnet. You do have to be a school administrator in order to see that information. So most of the time when you click on it, you will not see anything because we're in not as school administrators. Enrollment and academic record, you will be able to see a history of the student and what schools they've been in as long as it's within North Carolina. You will also be able to see attendance information. Attendance is updated weekly on Saturday nights. So your attendance info is not quite updated every day like everything else is. That is the one that's only updated once a week. But the nice thing is you'll be able to click on it. You can see the dates that the students were absent. Program data, we do have program data for EL and AIG in Schoolnet. So you'll be able to see that information if there is any about the student. Benchmark tests and classroom tests. these two tabs are all the tests the student has taken within Schoolnet. So I could see benchmark and classroom tests for tests that the student has taken in other courses. So anything in Schoolnet. So I would be able to see, for example, going back to that elective teacher, if I was a PE teacher, if I wanted to make a phone call home maybe about a student, I could check in Schoolnet and see how they're doing in their classroom and benchmark tests and in those courses, other courses, just to kind of get a better picture of the student and what's going on. The next tab is a tab that's not really used as much in North Carolina as I think it could be, and that is the Learning Plan and Teacher's Notes. So the Learning Plan and Teacher's Notes is a screen where only other teachers of the student would see that information. It is a place where you can note strategies that you have tried with the student. You can note parent contact, and as well as some MTSS strategies or interventions and tracking. So we do have some districts that have started looking at the learning plan and teacher's notes as a way where they could keep their MTSS interventions, but we haven't had anything widespread yet that I would like to brag about. I'm hoping we'll have something in the next year or so. And then lastly, that last one is the TestNav PMP. That is for Schoolnet. It is where if a student has any accommodations or 504 plan, they would have those marked in the TestNav PNP. So that way when the student takes an online test in Schoolnet, they would receive those accommodations.
We have one question, Pam.
Okay.
So we use My Track for this learning plan and teacher notes.
Yep, I know MyTrack is another solution out there that helps with MTSS processes. I'm just trying to help people know that this is also available in Schoolnet, and you're already paying for Schoolnet. So one note about the student profile is that you can also create a PDF of any of these pages. So that way, like if you need something for a student portfolio, or if you wanted to send home a copy of some of their test data, you can use that create PDF to make a copy of the individual students. All right. So now I'm going to go ahead and log into the training site and show you how to find the student profile. And Julia, I saw your comment there. I think a lot of people just don't know that that's available in Schoolnet. So maybe you can go back and tell some folks in your district and save some money in the future, right? So every district has specific logins to our training site. So if you're interested in getting your logins, you can go to your particular Schoolnet administrator for your district and ask for a training site login, and they should be able to give that to you. So that way you can go in and practice, or if you're leading a professional development for your school and you want to be able to demonstrate things without worrying about student data being displayed, you can definitely use the training site for those things. All right, so now I'm on the home screen of Schoolnet. I'm gonna, since I logged in as a district leader, I'm gonna have to choose a school and a teacher. All right, so I've gone down here and we're going to be spending a lot of time in this Classroom Assessment Monitor, or CAM widget is what we call it. And you'll notice there's several tabs in this CAM widget. There's a tab for district and local tests. So our district benchmarks and school benchmarks, classroom tests are tests exclusive to that teacher. And then standardized tests, of course, this is where we can go back in and look at either end of course or end of grade, and look and see student score groups, and you'll notice they're color coded. Upcoming tests are any tests that students are scheduled to take. But we're going to go and we're going to scroll down a little bit more past this initial home screen here for this test, and we'll start to see a list of student names. So when you start to see a list of student names, you'll notice anything in blue is a hyperlink in Schoolnet. So we're going to click on a student name, and that's going to take us to the profile. There's a few different ways to get to a student's profile in Schoolnet. This is just the way I prefer because I'm always on the home page anyway. So here I can go through and see those tabs. So this particular student doesn't have any disciplinary incidents, so I was going to show you that, but I did want to point out this enrollment and academic record. So I can go back into prior years and see this particular student's enrollments and absences. So since this is a high school that I'm currently in, I can go back all the way back to 3rd grade. And I would be able to see their school. It's just, since we're in the training site, we have that information masked, but you could go in and click and see, their absences, what days they were recorded absent, those kinds of things. I could go in and look and see what tests that they've taken in Schoolnet. And if I wanted to click the filters, I could go back and see prior years too. So it's not just limited to this year's tests. You can go back and see how a student did in previous years as well. The only thing is you can only see students who currently teach, and how Schoolnet determines what you currently teach is based on which courses you are a teacher of record. So if you happen to be a support teacher, a co-teacher, or maybe a instructional coach and you don't have a classroom assigned to you, then you need to get with your school data manager to see how you can have some additional roles assigned to you in PowerSchool to give you access to be able to see the students that you need to see. So your data manager at your school is the one who issues roles, because roles for Schoolnet live in PowerSchool, and they will be able to help you with that, and any changes they make take an overnight sync to take effect. All right, so I'm going to go look at that learning plan and teacher's notes that I was talking to you about. So you can see there's a parent contact log, strengths, opportunities for improvement, some strategies, remediation strategies, ESL strategies, student work that you can upload. And again, that is multi-year, so you can go back in time and see maybe, what the teachers the year before or 3 years before have done for the student. So that would have been a great thing for me as a middle school teacher, a fresh start of the year, to know what strategies were successful for our student before. And then lastly, there's that TestNav PNP. So according to a student's IEP or 504, you can give the accommodations that they're supposed to have on online testing. All right, any questions about student profiles before we can move on?
Not right now, Pam.
Wonderful. All right. So I'm going to click on the little home button. So Schoolnet does not like the back button. If you are, that's kind of your normal habit, is just to click on the back button. You may get a little random error message that says my apologies in Schoolnet, and that is usually from the back button. It doesn't like it. So I always try to train myself to click on the little red house and go back to the home page. So we're going to go scroll down to that classroom assessment monitor again. And this time we're going to come over here and we're going to look at this benchmark. That is a benchmark common assessment for the district. And I'm going to look at this reports feature over here, and you'll notice there's 5 reports. There's 3 and then a line and then 2 more. So these 3 above are the specific reports for that specific test, right? So test summary goes over that test. Standards analysis is going to go over the standards aligned to that test. And then item analysis is going to be our in-depth item by item look at the report. The reports that are beneath this line are actually our cumulative reports. So Schoolnet keeps cumulative reports based on how many times we assess a student, what their mastery is. And so we're going to take a few minutes to go in and look at each one of these, but I just wanted to point out that distinction and why that line is there. So these first three are specific to the test, and then the other ones are going to be cumulative based on how much and how frequently we use Schoolnet. So I see Melissa has a question. And so your role for Schoolnet has to be assigned in PowerSchool. And if your situation doesn't change, then your role stays the same. So for example, teachers are teachers, and as long as you're teaching at the same school, your role doesn't have to be updated. If you change schools within your district, you do need to have your role changed, or else you'll still see your old school. If, for example, your role changes, like maybe you start off as a teacher and then became an assistant principal, then your role also needs to change, because instead of just seeing your classroom, you now need to see the entire school. And your school data manager handles all of those changes. So unless your situation has changed where you're teaching at a different school or a different district, or your role has changed within the school where you're doing something different, then no, your role does not have to change from year to year. All right, and we do have ongoing communications with PowerSchool, just so that way we kind of talk about this at the end of each year too. So that way our data managers know, hey, if some people are changing roles, they need their role changed for Schoolnet. So we're going to start with that test summary. So over here on the report side, and the test summary is pretty much what you would expect it to be. It has your score groups and your student scores. You can sort or filter your performance comparison by student subgroups. And again, anything that's blue, you can click on. So if I wanted to see my 13 male students, should take a second and it should load. There's my list of my 13 male students. So and just different ways to filter the information. Your score groups, we did get this question in earlier webinars today. These score groups are set the same across the state. Unfortunately, we cannot customize it for each district or for each teacher. However, as a teacher, you can go into each test and customize the test and customize the score groups for that particular test. It's something that you would have to do on a test by test basis, but you can change the colors and the score groups for each individual test. It's not something we can do at the state level, or it's not like a preference that you can set for all your tests. It's something that you would have to do for each test. But that is something you can do if you like to color code and change your groups up maybe to closely match the EOC or EOG. You can do that on an individual test basis. All right, so going on to the next report, we do have a standards analysis. So for this particular test, there were quite a few standards on it. And you can see performance by standard. You can also see how many items were aligned to that particular standard. Every item in Schoolnet has to be aligned to a standard. Just to let you know, as an FYI, we have almost every single set of standards in Schoolnet possible. So if you're an EL teacher or you're looking for the extended standards for EC, we have those. You're looking for CTE standards, we have those. You're looking for, art, PE, music, we have all of those standards loaded. You should be able to find your standards that you need for your course. If you cannot, please let me know, because that's something at the state level that I help update every year as standards change. So going down from the bar graph, you'll notice too there's an export. All of our reports can be exported either to Excel or to PDF. You'll see that the standard has how many questions are aligned to it. That's the number next to it. And this particular assessment is a district assessment, district benchmark. So I can see the average score per standard for the district, for my school, as well as for my individual section. So that's a really nice comparison that you can have there. So for this particular standard here, the district average was 55%. The school average was 66%. This particular section was 73%. So it's nice to be able to see that kind of correlation there. Again, I can filter this by subgroup, so I can look and see. Keep in mind the number of students per subgroup. All right. So next we're going to go into item analysis. I'm going to pause for just a second to see if there's any questions, because item analysis can take a minute to pull up.
No questions right now, Pam.
All right, well, we'll see if they come in as we're waiting for this page. And so the item analysis does load all of the questions from your test. So the longer your assessment is, the longer it will take this page to load, just an FYI.
Pam, a question did come up. Is North Carolina happy with keeping Schoolnet for the next 5 to 10 years, or does Schoolnet have competitors in the market? For example, I heard that we may consider moving from Google Classroom to Canvas on a trial basis for the 2020-21 year. Maybe they mean to Google Classroom.
Right. Okay. So, we've had Schoolnet now for, I believe, 6 years. Our contract is going through the process for a 1-year extension through June of 2021. So I feel very confident in saying that we will have Schoolnet through the end of next year. We do have some state procurement processes that mean that we have to go out for rebidding every so many years just to make sure we're getting the best deal for the state's taxpayers' dollars. So there is a possibility that we will have to go out for rebidding for Schoolnet. That doesn't mean necessarily that will change. Of course, there's always competitors. I do think that Schoolnet has provided a stable system for the last 4 to 5 years and has provided improvements every year based on North Carolina feedback. But we will have to see what our Department of Instructional Technology over at DIT says, and we'll have to follow their procurement processes, so they may be requiring us to go out for bid next year. I will say that our leadership is very dedicated to making sure that if we did have a different system, that it would have at least the same quality and the same features as Schoolnet, and all of our data would be migrated. So those two things would be non-negotiables of any procurement process.
Okay, we have another question. Would the school data manager be the one that assigns students their testing accommodations?
No. So the school data manager usually does not have information about student IEPs and 504s. So different schools have different processes. I've seen it done where the homeroom teacher is responsible for going into Schoolnet and marking that TESNA PNP for the students in their homeroom. I've also seen it where the EC case manager goes into Schoolnet and marks the TESNA PNP for all the students within their caseload. And then I've seen it where, they pick the math teachers or the science teachers are responsible for going in and marking them. Just one teacher of the student needs to do it, and then those preferences remain on the student's profile for all of their other courses. So I will mention with accommodations, it's a two-part process. You have to go into the student's profile and mark their PNP. And when you create a test, you have to enable accommodations. So when you're creating a test, there's a little set of questions that asks you about accommodations. And so you have to go in and make sure you do that as well. Okay, so our item analysis screen has loaded. Right here where it says order by item number is the default. However, I like percent correct because in a limited amount of time, if we're discussing an item analysis report as maybe a PLC, I want to focus on the questions that I really need to review. So looking at item 7, I definitely need to review that with my students. It looks like the correct answer is B. And looking at my students, it looks like most of them chose A. So that's a great conversation point from me. And if I wanted to, if I clicked on item 7, it would pull up the item and the answer choices, and I could actually go over it with my students. So you can, look at this as a tool for, just making sure that students' names aren't visible down there, but you could actually pull up question by question with the item analysis without looking at individual student scores. Of course, you can always export this. You can highlight your low performing students. That kind of gives you a quick glance at, who I need to look at. But the real money in the bank for me is the next report, which is Standards Mastery. So Standards Mastery is one of those cumulative reports that I was telling you about. It's going to keep track of how many times I assess each standard as I assess them. It's going to keep track of how many items that I've assessed for each standard and how many times I've assessed it. So I can see that this first standard here, I have 9 students that are in that 90 to 100. I have 6 that are in the 19 to 0 and 2 that are undetermined. Undetermined means they haven't taken the test yet. Or maybe they skipped that question, but most of the time it means they haven't taken that particular assessment. So obviously there's only one item for the standard, so I'm not going to place a whole lot of confidence in the ones that are 9 to 100 or the ones that are 0 to 19. I am going to continue to look at this report though, especially, as we have more questions that build up over time and more times that we've assessed these standards. It's also a good quick check to look and see what standards I have assessed and what standards I haven't assessed my students on. So if I do click on any of these numbers, I'm taken to a report where I can see student names. So if I'm looking for, if I have Flex Fridays or, here in the time of remote learning, if I'm wondering who I need to schedule, a small group Zoom meeting with to go over some standards, using the Standards Mastery Report is very helpful. However, it's not very helpful if you don't use Schoolnet very often. So just keep that in mind. The Standards Mastery Report can be very, very helpful if you use Schoolnet on a regular basis, just like anything else, consistency is important, right? So one thing I will point out about the Standards Mastery Report is there's this little golden M. And what that will do is actually search for instructional materials in Schoolnet related to that standard. I'm not going to demonstrate this because we're in the training site, and the training site doesn't have as many materials as our production site. So if you click on this when you're actually in your Schoolnet instance, you will actually see a whole lot of lesson plans, activities, and resources that are free for you to use that are aligned to different standards. We have over, I think, 80,000 instructional materials in Schoolnet that are there for you to use for free. So click on that little golden M and you can help find some things, whether you need enrichment activities or whether you need remediation activities. Use that golden M with the Steiner Mastery report. Any questions before we move on?
No new questions.
All right, great. So I'm actually going to go to the home page now. So I'm going to go back to my home page. And we're going to spend the next few minutes looking at that reporting dashboard. So reporting is over on the left side, and reporting dashboard kind of looks like the little speedometer. So I'm going to click on there. And the first thing I'm going to do is show you how to go look at your prior year's data. So every summer in Schoolnet, just like PowerSchool has an end of year process, so does Schoolnet. In fact, we usually try to coordinate them so they're happening at the same time. And a lot of times what happens is after that kind of end of year process, people log into Schoolnet and say, hey, where did my tests go? Where did my data go? And the thing is it didn't go anywhere. It just got cleaned up for the next year. So right now, when you're looking at current enrollment, if you're in the summertime and it's July, you're not going to see anything because you don't have any students enrolled. It relies on the data from PowerSchool, and in PowerSchool you have a calendar and with student days set up. And so if you look at current enrollment when before the year is started, you're not going to see anything. So you click on this current enrollment and you can go back and see past school years. So we can go here and see all of the different years since we started using Schoolnet in North Carolina. We can see all the data. So I'm going back here last year, and I'm going to look for a common assessment for social studies. I think it was world history. Here we go. World History Common Assessment, and notice there's this little box where you can put a check mark. So I'm going to check this box, and now it says one test is selected. So this goes hand in hand with comparing assessments. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to the current year, and I'm going to look at that test that we were just looking at, which was World History Common Assessment Spring. Here we go. And now I have two tests selected, right? So it says down here, two tests selected, and now I'm going to click on this blue button that says compare assessments. So what I've done is I've gotten the same test from last year to this year, and actually, wait a minute, I've got Common Assessment 4 and Common Assessment 3, so I need to go find Common Assessment 3. So to do that, I can just click on this little trash can and click on cancel. So I need to go back to World History Common Assessment 3. There it is. So now I've got Common Assessment 3, and oh, it was 2018. No, okay. So now I need Common Assessment 4. Sorry, I did that again. It's been a long day. All right, Common Assessment 4. Common Assessment 2. Three. All right. So we're going to go back then to Common Assessment 3. And then I'm going to change my one from last year to Common Assessment 3, since I can't seem to find Common Assessment 4. Uncheck that one. There we go. Now we're comparing apples to apples, right? All right, very important to make sure you always think of that. All right, so now I have Common Assessment 3, Spring 2018, Common Assessment 3, Spring 2019. All right, we can choose some additional data elements to add to our report. I always like additional data elements. Who doesn't like more data, right? One important thing to note is you'll see EL and gifted here. Then under programs, you'll also see EL and AIG here. So when you look at data elements, EL and gifted here is just going to say yes or no. So yes, student is EL. No, student is not. Yes, they're gifted. No, they're not. Whereas if you look at program data, it's actually going to give you a little bit more granularity. Like for AIG, it's going to tell me if it's a student academically gifted, are they just gifted in reading, are they just gifted in math? So it's going to give me a little bit more information. So I always choose everything. When in doubt, check it all, right? So I'm going to click on Generate Report. And now we can look and see. So here are my students overall for 2018, 55% proficiency, whereas now in 2019, they had 71% proficiency, right? It might also be important to note the number of students who took the test. So last year looks like 119 students taking it, whereas this year is only 60. So that might have something to do with the numbers. But you'll now notice too that there's all of these filters, right? So I can look at gender. I can also look at all teachers. So maybe I'm just looking at myself, right? So here's, oh, looks like they have no data. No, that's not good. Oh, they almost have no data. Well, that's interesting. But anyway, so you can see, you can filter by teachers. It might help if you have a teacher who happened to teach the same course both years. But anyhow, obviously, if you're looking at your own test data, you're only going to see the tests you've given. So you're going to be good there. You're not going to have this example. But if you, for those instructional coaches on the call right now, that's a good point for you. So if we continue to scroll down, again, we can look at that gifted, yes or no, versus AIG, and then we see their actual student counts for the numbers. So maybe I really want to look and see if, how are we serving our students who are academically gifted in reading, right? So what's their percentage from one year to the next, right? Are they staying about the same? Are we serving them? Are we, challenging them? So this is a great point that you can now go over here to this comparison report and you can now export this. So you can either export everything or you can export just what you filtered down to. So if I was going to have a coaching conversation with maybe some of our AIG teachers, then I could go ahead and, filter just this visible data to Excel, right? Cool. So any questions about comparison reports? You can compare up to 10 tests at one time. And coming this summer, we have our upgrade to Schoolnet to 22.0. And you'll notice right now, comparison report is just looking at raw score and proficiency. Coming this summer, we will also be adding standards to this. So you'll actually be able to go in and compare standards performance from one test to another. It doesn't have to be tests, from different years. You can go back and just, look at comparing at tests this year. So that was just an example that I was doing because I know I would have liked to been able to do this when I was in the classroom, to go back from one year to another and look at differences and trends from one group to another. But you can go in here and another thing that you can do is once you have, let me go back and generate that report again. Another thing that you can do is you can save reports, so that way you can rerun them, which I always like to do. I'm a fan of that. Why, once I set up the report the way I want it, why don't I have to, redo it again, if I just click on Save Report, and then when the next year comes, I can go back and edit this one report and add the new test versus adding the other tests. So, if you give the same assessments year after year or semester after semester, you can just keep one report going and click Save and edit that one same report. So that's a nice little feature to have there. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and go back to my slide deck, and we're just going to make sure that I've covered everything here because it is almost 8 o'clock. So these slides here just have some more summary information about each one of those reports that we've gone over, so you can look at this. For that comparison report, I do have written instructions as well as a video linked in the slide deck, so you can go back. Let's take a moment now that we're all data experts in Schoolnet, and look at some data scenarios. All right, so if I'm a classroom teacher and I need to make a student remediation groups based on a recent assessment, what would you use? And we're going to ask another poll question. So like Allison said, if you have full screen, if you want to minimize it slightly so that way when I launch this poll, you can try to answer. We'll see if that works. So we'll give about 15 seconds or so. We're going to do these quickly. So this was a teacher who was wanting to make student remediation groups. Student remediation groups, what would you do? And there's no wrong answer to these. Just FYI, you can probably do these things with all of them. I would say the Steiner Mastery report would probably be easiest to create those groups. Test summary also wouldn't be a bad idea either. All right, so next scenario here, I'm looking to find individual performance data. What would I use? So individual performance data, where could I go in Schoolnet to find it? I'm gonna give about 10 more seconds to get your answers in. All right, so a lot of you are saying that student profile. Yes, definitely. Also, test summary would be a good place because if you're looking for just, one particular test that students recently taken, absolutely. We have one more, and that is I want to see performance on a first quarter benchmark and second quarter benchmarks with a filter for AIG students. What would you use? Don't think we've talked about that. So first quarter, third quarter, AIG kids. How could we find that? So about 10 more seconds. All right, so yes, comparison report. You could do that with some of these others, but you'd be going back and forth looking at one test to another. So that comparison report would definitely be the easiest place, but you could definitely do it with the others too. All right. So I do have an exit ticket on slide 17, just your one takeaway of what you're going to be using for today. So it is a link to a Google form, and you can actually view everything from today, all the respondents from today's webinars. We've had about 650 people this morning, and about 200 people this afternoon, and then about 60 of us this afternoon have taken this form, so you can see what everyone's takeaways are, which I think is always nice to kind of see what everyone else is planning on doing. But I do want to point out too some resources on slide 18. So we have a Google site where I have an archive of all of the webinars I've done over the last 2 years for Schoolnet. So if you're new to Schoolnet tonight, you know that you're part of the half that said you're a very beginner, I encourage you to go look at that Google site and see some of those videos that I've archived. We also have a report library. So if you're interested more in learning about reports, you can click there and learn more about those. And then finally, use my contact information. So we are more than happy to connect with you. You have my email address as well as on Twitter. And I'll take one last look and see if there were any questions. And it doesn't look like I see any coming in. So just a reminder, you will, as Julie put in the chat, within 5 business days, you will get an email from me to the email address that you registered with your CEU certificate, a link to the recording of this webinar, as well as a copy of the slide deck. So make sure that you have a copy from either that bit.ly that you typed in or from the PDF on the slide deck, but you'll also get it in an email too. All right, so thank you very much for your time tonight and for taking some time out of your evening. I know how busy, crazy time this is, but I hope this was helpful for you. And thank you, Julie and Cami, for helping with the chat tonight and questions.
You're welcome.
You're very welcome.
Yeah, so the exit question is just that Google quick little Google survey on slide 17. It's one question, and if you do not complete it, it does not affect your attendance. I just am curious to know what your one takeaway is for today. And so I'll put that link in the chat one more time to the exit ticket. So thank you very much. Have a wonderful evening.
Y'all have a good night. Thank you.
Night.